Senator Aimee Marcos from Ilocos Norte. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, I hear you loud and clear, all the way to Lawag, Ilocos Norte.
All right, okay. Okay, well, we lost a bit of time. We were hoping to speak with you much longer. Let's start first, ma'am. Of course, you are tasked to reconcile both the Senate and the House versions. There's only 162 billion pesos, of which 140 billion will be readily available, while 22 billion will form a standby fund. Can you explain exactly what this means?
Well, sabihin ko na ako yung dakilang Ilocana, pero kahit papano, napakakuripot nitong budget na to. Hirap na hirap kami. There's so much or so little to fight over because it's simply impossible to accommodate everyone's requests. It's a very small fund, 140, of which 50 goes direct to the banks. So already there's 1/3 locked off. And very, very little left to give away to the tourism sectors, the transportation groups, of course, our health workers, which the president has promised, the 15,000 per head, our students, most of all our OFWs. Ang haba po ng listahan. Kung sinabi nila na kapag maikli ang kumot, bumaluktot, kapag wala ng kumot, tumbling na po.
Oo. May nagbago po ba sa mga figures? Halimbawa po sa allotments, binanggit niyo po na ang 50 billion, it will really go to the banks. What about the 10 billion pesos that I think the Health Department was asking to go to PhilHealth for testing? Matutuloy po ba yun, ma'am?
Well, that's still under negotiation. Katakot-takot na tanungan because after all, the PhilHealth has a big fund, a big reserve fund. It's alleged that the 220 billion that had been saved up there has now been much, much less. Yung investigasyon kahapon, pati si Secretary Duque umamin, surrender na rin siya at may corruption talaga at sindikato. So it's a real issue. Many of us really do not want to give the 10 billion. Isa na ako doon. Ayoko talaga magdagdag pa ng pera at nauubos lang. Kung 10 billion na 10 billion lang, ano ba naman ibigay na lang natin sa mga tao na ngailangan, na wala ng trabaho at na-displaced ng mga OFW.
Where would you want this 10 billion to be allotted to, Senator Marcos, instead of it going to PhilHealth for testing? Because you said may pera naman ang PhilHealth.
Well, we'd like the 10 billion to go to testing, Department of Health, Department of D&D for their efforts in contact tracing, the LGUs and the public works in setting up isolation and quarantine facilities, all these COVID-related health activities that we feel are in safer hands, unfortunately. So it's a really tricky balance and one that's very, very difficult. Obviously, yung ating congressmen, marami ring inaatupag. Katulad rin namin, may sarili-sarili kaming mga humingi ng tulong.
Okay. Bukod po dyan, no, just to itemize etong 140 billion, bakit po pa kinailangan na 140 ang readily available? Why set aside the 22 billion, Senator, as a standby fund? What is the logic of setting that aside?
Well, there is really no logic as such. It's more like a prayer. The 140 billion, we've been assured by the Secretary of Finance and all our money managers is available. Andyan na yan. So sigurado tayo dyan. Ang problema, yung House at kami, hindi talaga mapagkasya sa dami-dami ng request. So we put aside 22, perhaps even 26 as a standby provision.
Okay.
So if you get really lucky, maka-jackpot tayo at makatipid, for example, from the different sources of funds, such as the debt interest payments, naman they will be less because we always apportion them. For example, we can get from 2020 budget, according to me at least, I don't think anyone traveled, so all the travel expenses, the training expenses, for example, which can be postponed for a better time. All these things, kupupin natin at ibigay na natin sa tao bilang tulong sa panahong ito.
Okay. All right. On another aspect, I wanted to ask you, there's 10 billion for workers in tourism enterprises, and Congressman Rufus Rodriguez is asking that the 10 billion intended for TIEZA be given directly to the DOT. Apparently, the House version allocates it to TIEZA, it's unlike the Senate version. Can you expound on that? Are you still giving 10 billion to the DOT?
Well, malaking chismis yan, ano? Kasi there's been a lot of wrangling within Congress. May sariling dynamic sila. For me personally, I know that the tourism sector has been the longest hit. December pa, wala nang dumarating na Chinese tourists sa Cebu, sa Ilocos. Hirap na talaga pati Boracay. As a result, this has been a very long period of unemployment and no income. So yun nga, ang gusto ko sana, 3 billion at least should be added to the support for those who become jobless.
Okay.
And it's very important that we give 6 billion as requested to the tourism enterprises, yung small and medium na talagang naghihikaos ng mga restaurant, bar, beachside resorts, and so on.
Okay. So yung 10 billion, to be specific, you wanted it that 6 billion goes to itong mga small tourism enterprises. Yung 3 billion, saan po siya ulit, Senator Aimee?
Gusto ko diretsong payout na, social protection, subsidies for those who have lost their jobs, have had no income coming, the freelancers, the tour guides, the self-employed, all of them who really depend on tourism because it's been such a long time that there have been no tourists coming through.
Okay. All right. And then there's still...
Yung remaining 1 billion, para wala nang away, para may tourism infrastructure pa rin, because after all, we do need tourism infrastructure. To my mind, it's important to have pedestrian and biking lanes, given that transports become such an issue. And so I think there's a need for tourism infrastructure. It also primes the economy like all infrastructure does. Yung 1 billion, para wala nang away, DPWH. Total sila naman talaga expert sa construction.
Okay. Now, 15 billion for cash for work program in communities. How would this be implemented, and is it still at 15 billion, Senator?
Yes, hindi nabawasan na eh. I'm actually completely dismayed by the cash for work support, the support for impacted sectors. Apakapayat, nakahanap pa rin kami. Kasi konting-konti to, lahat nagdadaing na. As we know, there are horrific projections for our OFWs. Nakakatakot. Hundreds of thousands are coming back jobless and perhaps ill. So that's a real issue. Nakakahabag yung transport sector natin, na naglilimos na itong makikisig at masisipag ng mga tatay ng pamilya. So we're hoping to restore the 15 billion. Pero ika nga, wala nang pagkunan. Hopefully we can get something in the standby provision.
I see. So yung cash for work program in communities, so far in your BICAM, magkano po ngayon ang nakalaan, Senator?
Sabihin ko totoo, nasa 5 billion na lamang. Tapos yung 2 billion, nasa standby pa. Talagang kakarampot to. It's not going to last a week. I'm absolutely terrified.
Yeah.
Seriously speaking.
Oo. Paano po itong 17 billion for the DOTR to assist workers who have lost their jobs? Nandun pa po ba yun, Senator?
Naku, natastas na yan. Talaga naman, waglit-waglit na. Nasa 6 billion, tapos standby 1 billion. Ang dami ko ng code, din ko na mabasa. Sa totoo lang, puros pula-pula na ito na XX na. So hopefully today, I don't know, may himala. At sabi nga ni Nora Honor, hindi walang himala, dapat merong himala. At bagsakan tayo na napakaraming pera. I understand where our finance people are coming from. They're trying to impose prudent fiscal management, but on the other hand, eto nga, talagang ang hirap-hirap talagang pagkasyahin, pati middle class, pati yung mga dating employed, pati may-ari ng negosyo, lahat humihingi ng tulong. Hirap talaga.
Okay, well, the figures you're giving us now are quite surprising. So just for news purposes, I don't want to get anything wrong. The 15 billion for cash on work has now gone to 5 billion. 17 billion for DOTR assistance has gone down to 6 billion. Meron pa po bang 15 billion to direct cash subsidy, interest-free loans to farmers, fishermen, livestock, plant? Buhay pa po ba yun, Senator?
Buhay pa! Buhay pa rin, pero
Okay.
eto nga, kinatay-katay na. Talagang nasa-chop-chop lahat kasi we've tried to accommodate as much as we can. The President has promised 15,000 to our health workers. There have been promises also to our teachers, which is obviously something we need to do. And lahat humihingi ng tulong to publish the lessons, the lesson plans that will now have to be distributed per child. And there's simply no money in the local governments or in the local DepEd to print all these materials, as well as beef up their Wi-Fi. Eto tayo struggling with Wi-Fi. It's sort of ironic. And at the same time, make sure that there's a place where the kids can actually access these lessons online.
Oo. So you're trying to tell us even the online materials are part of this 140 billion, Senator? Hindi
Can
ba
you
pwede
believe
i-realign?
this? Yes, can you believe this? Even the best budget-conscious housewives like us are going to have a really tricky time. Yes, they're included. The production of all the printed material, online material, broadcast material for TV and radio lessons. Can you imagine? Lahat yan pinagsisik-sik-sik talaga namin dyan.
Oo.
Pagkahirap-hirap, naawa ako sa chairman namin, si Chairman Sunny Angara, and for the House panel, Chairman El Rey.
Yeah. Okay. And are you still setting
We
aside...
have,
Yeah, go ahead.
andito haba na listahan ko, may development for smart campuses, TESDA scholarship for training and retraining, DSW for individuals in crisis, yung mga namatayan. Naku, assistance to LGUs na kailangan magpatayo ng isolation units, hiring of contact tracers na hinihingi ng DILG. Ang menu namin papahaba-haba.
Oo. So, lahat po yun, ang total has to be 140 billion only.
That's correct. And
Okay.
then we are giving a standby provision for the president. Like I said, if you pray really hard, a great big miracle falls in our laps, and we get an extra 22, 26 billion from, I don't know, perhaps debt servicing, at least dun sa interest na inallocate. Baka makatipid tayo, humingi tayo ng tulong. At for example, in our present budget, delete all the travel expenses, wala namang magka-travel, yung training, pwede ba i-postpone, all these things that we can think of.
Oo. And how much do you think, Senator Aimee, would that amount to pag tinanggal po lahat yun sa budget ng gobyerno?
I'm hopeful that this will be a substantial amount. Of course, our money managers and the finance department is very hesitant about a debt moratorium. Although, to my mind, that's been offered. Inalok na yun ng mga nagpapautang. The G20 has spoken, the IMF has spoken that this year, we just roll over to next year. Konting palugid lang naman. Hindi naman tayo manunuba. Pabayaran natin at pabayaran pa rin.
Oo. But will our credit ratings change, for example, if we take the debt moratorium?
Yes, that is a big concern, but I think at this point in time, everyone's credit ratings will come crashing down. Hopefully that's not the case for us. Our fundamentals, as they like to say, are rock solid. So there's really no reason. On the other hand, mas importante sa akin kaysa sa credit rating, sa totoo lang, yung buhay ng tao. Kasi nakikita ko, napakahirap ng sitwasyon.
All right. Now, I wanted to ask you, today is the first day of GCQ in NCR. What are your
Akala
thoughts?
ko the first day of Ghost Month for the Chinese. and the
GCQ.
Chinoy.
So I wanted to ask you your thoughts. I mean, you have two sides. Health experts that wanted to extend MECQ, and you also have economists that say, well, of course, the finance secretary is one, and Malacanang saying we can't afford it anymore. I want to get your thoughts on that first.
Well, I think we don't need to think of it as a conflict or as a balancing of interest. I think we need to learn to live with the virus, as many of the very successful countries have, and just undertake the precautions that all our doctors have told us we need to do. Social distancing, the face masks, the avoidance of crowded places. I think we need to really follow these very, very strictly. In fairness, sa totoo lang, hindi ako naniniwala na pasaway ang Pilipino. Sumusunod naman tayo sa face mask. Laking takot na lang natin. The problem is the great inequity in space. For those who are much wealthier and those who are poorer. It is said that an average of 2 meters is all that the informal settler in the crowded areas of Metro Manila have. Or in Cebu, ang sikip-sikip, wala pang 2 metro. Paano nga naman mag-physical distancing?
Pag ganun po, ano ang magandang sinabi po ninyo yon? Kasi no less than Secretary Anyo at one point said kahit sa bahay, dapat mag-mask and practice social distancing at home. And he was criticized by some netizens saying, paano po yung bahay namin, napakaliit, paano kami magso-social distancing? What do you make of that recommendation by Secretary Anyo? And how would you do it? What advice would be doable in situations like that?
Yes, I think Secretary Anyo was only taking the advice of our doctors. So he's merely echoing what the scientists have really told us. And unfortunately, the poor guy is sick again as a result of working too hard. And ang masasabi ko, siguro we have to have some creative solutions to this shortage in space. Kami, ino-open up namin yung mga public spaces, yung mga public auditoriums, yung ating mga public sports stadiums, mga ganyan. Buksan na natin kung ano man yung mga hotel tulad nga ng ginagawa ng ibang syudad. Let's just open them up and accept that the reality is part of poverty in this multifaceted, multidimensional problem is really a poverty in space din. Kasi hindi lang cash ang kulang, pati lugar.
Now, I wanted to ask you, as we move towards GCQ, doctors asked for a timeout of 2 weeks, and it was supposed to build the health capacity. With this 140 billion peso budget, clearly it's not enough to build our health capacity. Senator Marcos, how much would we need, if I were to ask you, to build the health capacity? Pay for nurses, frontliners, hospital beds, etc., etc.
Aminin na natin, ang totoo, wala tayong maayos na healthcare sa Pilipinas. There's simply no reliable, accessible, quality healthcare in the Philippines. And it takes decades to build, and we've been very, very remiss in not investing in healthcare. And now suddenly, that we're all crying for doctors and nurses, we realize this. We have this really shocking statistic that we are killing our doctors. We're not able to protect those who are supposed to protect our lives. This is really shocking. In other countries, maybe 2% of the doctors get infected. But here in the Philippines, we're talking about 13, 15% getting sick because they have no PPEs, they have no masks. We're simply exposing them without giving them any defenses. Ito talaga ang hindi katanggap-tanggap. So, eto nga, how much will we need? Much too much indeed, because we're catching up. It's a terrible catch-up game, which we're destined to lose. So I think this is one thing that we learn from COVID. And sabi nga nila, don't waste a crisis. And truly, let's not let the crisis of COVID go to waste, and instead rest the opportunity of finally building a proper universal healthcare system for the Philippines. Ganun din sa edukasyon. Nakita natin wala tayong matinong digital infrastructure. So now we're so dependent on that, and online education is on the lips of every single one, from teachers to parents to children who are longing to go back to school. And let's take this opportunity, wag na natin sabihin crisis, this crisis, and grab the opportunity, convert it so that we can finally give ourselves a decent Wi-Fi and digital setup.
Okay. Pero natanggap na po ba ng Senado, for example, nung Bayanihan 1, I think 75 billion was allotted, right, to the Department of Health. Have they actually accounted for, Senator Marcos, where they spent the 75 billion?
Yes, there's been some kind of accounting, but given that we've required them to report every week, kino-consolidate, hindi pa siya kompleto. Medyo magulo nga. At nagre-reklamo yung executive, hirap daw sila. They're working full-time, tapos they have to report to us every week. It's the numbers are not all in, but you can be sure that we will go through them with a fine-tooth comb. As we said, this started as a health crisis. It's now become an economic problem, and we don't want it to proceed to become a social problem. The advice of all the economists is that we go fast, we go big, we go hard. But yun nga, yung 140 is very, very small. But given that Bill Gates says that this will carry on until the end of next year, talagang kailangan hinay-hinay yung paglabas ng pera rin, inot-inot, para makaakot dun sa next year na sinasabi.
You've seen also proposals coming from the lower house and also the Senate. That's in the House, it's Congresswoman Kimbo. In the Senate, there's a version from Senator Recto of stimulus packages amounting to 1 trillion split in 3 years. Is that something you believe that the country needs, even if we can't afford it?
Yes, I also filed a similar bill for economic stimulus. Hindi nga stimulus ang pinag-uusapan eh. Social protection pa lamang, wala pang recovery. Tapos yung stimulus, malayo-layo pa tayo. I estimated it to be 725 this year. And that's actually what I filed, and it's quite similar to Ralph Recto's. And Stella Kimbo, of course, being the real economist among us, has staggered it over a period of 3 years. But the economic managers are very wary of promising great sums at this point, given that even our tax collection the collections have really slumped.
All right. I'm curious, in the BICAM, are there proposals that have been adopted in Bayanihan 2 that can revive and open the economy? I mean, one interesting thing is the BICAM, you've agreed to suspend certain permits to fast-track the construction of cell towers. So that's quite promising. Are there any?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a very good provision, and it follows the mandate of the president that we should expedite. But I come from the LGU sector, and I was a governor for a good long time. It's not always the issue of local government sitting on it. Sometimes there's simply a lack of dialogue. For example, we had these issues with Poway Church and Globe Telecom, and I'm hopeful that the local governments are also consulted. In spite of all this, we are not always the cause of delay. Very often, we try to expedite this because, after all, kami rin ang magbe-beneficio dyan sa mga cell tower na yan. So, for 3 years, we've all agreed that every local government should expedite. But I beseech the telcos to also please consult all the LGUs because sometimes there are real problems.
Okay. Another thing, what about the proposed loan moratorium? What's the final decision sa BICAM, Senator Marcos?
This is the loan moratorium para sa ating international debt?
No.
Is this para sa agrarian reform na pinipilit ko? Pinipilit ko sa dito.
I think there's a few, no? There's a proposed 1-year loan moratorium under Bayanihan 2 that I think some have asked to make it just a maximum of 60 days?
Oh, that's right. That's right. Our poor banking sector, already beleaguered by so many non-paying loans, have said that kapag 1 year na walang magbabayad, they'll go belly up and to be deadly for the economy. That's entirely understandable. The Senate version was 30 days, sa totoo lang. But I think we've come to a compromise. The 60 days should be all. The Bayanihan 2 will only be until December 31 in any case. So talagang sakto lang yung 60 days at wala nang paulit-ulit kasi hindi daw kaya talaga ng mga bangko natin magkakagulo. So this is one thing. I'd like to put a pitch for the other moratorium I'm talking about, which is for the agrarian reform beneficiaries. These are our subsistence and smallest farmers who don't even own their land. So and
this is now on third reading.
That's correct. This is final, and today at 10 o'clock we should be having another BICA. I'm hoping ito na yung final na meeting namin, mga marathon session to. And I'm hopeful that we can at least waive the interest of our farmers. Alam naman natin, walang pambayad, huwag na natin pigain. We are actually spending much more trying to collect in admin costs, in DAR efforts, in land bank efforts.
How much are we talking about, Senator Marcos? Do you have an estimate?
Halimbawa, sabihin natin 6 billion ang due taon-taon. Ang nababayaran lang 600 million. Sa totoo lang. Ang ginagastos ng land bank, pag idagdag mo lahat ng agrarian reform effort nila, nasa 1.1 billion. Pera pa yung sa DAR budget. Isipin mo, we're spending much more than we're collecting. This is madness.
All right. Before we go, I mean, it's quite sad that we weren't able to fix the signal because we were going to discuss so many things with you. But let's talk about joblessness. 45.5% of the labor force. This is a record high for the Philippines. That's the SWS survey. 27.3 million unemployed. And you actually have a recommendation, and it's quite interesting. I want to hear this. And how do you suggest we pump prime the economy right now to employ the hardest hit sectors? What would you do at this point with COVID out there?
Yes, the numbers are tragic. They're nothing short of disastrous. The human cost in terms of the families and the fathers and mothers who are unable to work is just a complete and utter human disaster. So, para sa akin, dapat magkaroon tayo ng real, complete job policy. Yun ang inaantay ko. Pag naririnig ko si President, sa totoo lang, I'm totally inspired and gung-ho. The next day, in the cold, clear light of the next day, I hear all these instructions about face shields and barriers. Pwede ba ang isipin natin, bigyan ng trabaho ang lahat? So I have a bill, yung trabaho sa panahon, sa oras ng pandemya. I think the example has been the work brigades of President Franklin Roosevelt during the Great Depression, when the government itself started hiring everyone to build this enormous infrastructure project. And curiously, even the creative sector were employed, such as Saul Bellow, Richard Wright, all of these authors that we know very well today. And they were employed to write, for example, tourist brochures and other Americana. In our case, we clearly need all the media reporters and stringers who've lost their jobs, all of our creatives to help the DepEd, for example, to put online, to put on television and radio the lessons of the kids. So I think government must do more, must intervene as the biggest employer.
All right. Ma'am, I just want to make pahabol one question, but I still have 4 minutes up to commercial, so I need to go. Should President Duterte already replace Ricardo Morales? Should they appoint someone else already?
Well, I think there needs to be a caretaker. PhilHealth is huge. It's arguably the biggest dispensing GOCC. It's important that we have someone in charge. I'm hopeful that the caretaker will be appointed ASAP. There are many qualified doctors. There are even in-house people who are very, very competent. It's important that they do it ASAP. And perhaps enjoin or outsource the IT issue, which is the source of corruption. Ang SSS, bakit hindi naman nagkakaproblema sa million-million na members? Pwedeng gawin natin yun o i-outsource sa third party, kaya galing-galing lang ating mga Pilipino. So, I'm hopeful for PhilHealth because we can't afford to have this crisis in the middle of this pandemic.
All right. Senator Imee Marcos, thank you so much for your time this morning. I hope that next time, better signal. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And this interview is the best argument for digital expenditure.
Thank you so much. Senator Imee Marcos, live from Ilocos Norte.